Inspiration for Teachers podcast, bringing you dynamic and inspirational educator interviews. Our fascinating guests share their professional challenges and creative resolutions for success. Discover their workable strategies, ideas, and resources to reach your educational goals. And now your host, Kelly Long.
Hey everyone, it's Kelly Long, and I'm super thrilled to be back with you on Season 5 of the Inspiration for Teachers podcast show. This season is all about creativity and innovation in education. Before we dive on into my first episode and my first guest, who's going to dive into everything to do with being creative around law, but teaching it from a poetic and artistic point of view, I'd like to remind those of you that are new to the show that you can go back and experience Season 4 and all of my past episodes. Season 4 specifically was about being a teachpreneur or edupreneur. We were looking into everything to do with creating profitable online courses, how you can use your resources to make an online living for yourself as a teacher. And there were some really fantastic guests that came on and really outlined for us what to do, what not to do, and how to set up a business from scratch and make the right decisions from the outset. So if you haven't had an opportunity yet to listen to that season, please go back and listen to Season 4. Now, I can't wait to get into this episode. It's going to be really great today with Andreas. But before we dive into that, I just wanted to give you some background as to why I wanted to do the Creativity and Innovation series, because it can be quite easy in our teaching just to stick to the same old routine or get bogged down by the content that we need to deliver to our students. And thinking really creative is quite difficult sometimes for us when we're under all of this pressure to get our students through their courses. But looking at it from a different viewpoint, I really wanted to go there and experience how some other educators are doing that and how they're looking at expressing how we can learn and how we can break down knowledge and content and how we can immerse the learner in a really creative environment. So I've got a real variety of topics coming up for you. Now, before I jump on into my conversation with Andreas, I'd just like to take a moment to thank our sponsors of the show. My Revision Pal is the online revision system for exam success. Many students struggle with revision, getting started, overcoming the mindset barriers, or even knowing what is an effective revision strategy. Students can learn how to pass their exams using My Revision Pal's online revision system. This 6-guided learning module program teaches students how to pass their exams using the 2 scientifically proven and most effective revision techniques. By the end of the program, students will feel more confident, be more focused, and will have the revision skills and systems in place to pass their exams. Right now, students can enroll for free and experience the first learning module. Head over to myrevisionpal.com, that's myrevisionpal.com, and sign up to experience your free trial. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Kelly Long, and thank you for joining me on this episode. I have a very exciting guest joining me today, and we've had a little bit of a joke in our pre-warm-up conversation because Andreas
Philippopoulos-Mihalopoulos
is joining me on the show. I just had massive stress there about saying Andreas's surname. So thank you so much for doing that for me, Andreas.
Pleasure.
So Andreas is Professor of Law and Theory at the University of Westminster. And he's going to be diving into how to use poetry, art and learning walks in your teaching, doing some very creative teaching. And we want to learn and understand how we can do that in our own teaching practice. But before we dive into that, Andreas, can you give us some background as to your work in education, please?
Sure. All my degrees are in law. So I started with an undergraduate degree in law, which was partly in Greece and partly in other cities in Europe. And then it was a master's degree also in law and then a PhD in law as well. But then by that time, things have started diversifying quite a lot. So it wasn't just law. It was all sorts of other things. And I realized my absolute passion for interdisciplinarity and just diving into different disciplines and seeing how they come together with the law. And since then, I think although I have obviously I work in a law school and I have an understanding of the law and I'm still working with the law, I consider it in a way my ethical duty not to teach law as a sort of doctrinal closed discipline, but I want to imagine and also to teach and to think about the law as something which is pretty much everywhere. It's all around us, and I'm just inviting students to discover it.
I'm really excited to get into this with you. And you've just said that you're a law professor and you've been using poetry and art and
and learning walks in your law teaching. So before we dive into how you've done that and what you've discovered, can you just outline for us, in your opinion, why do you believe creativity to be so important, and specifically in your subject specialism?
What isn't creative? I mean, frankly, I'm not quite sure what it means to be creative as opposed to just think and just, even pure calculations can be creative. Even ways of putting A and B together can be creative. The way that you think about things, about yourself, about your environment, the way that you even come into class is a creative activity, or can be a creative activity. But I think whatever you do, it's a sort of creation. It's a sort of, even if you repeat yourself, you're still creating something. So in a way, I don't want to idolize the idea of creativity as something quite out there and how difficult it is to do. I think everyone does that, and everyone is a little bit creative in some way or other. It's just, discovering one's strengths and playing with them. So at the same time, so let's think about creativity as pretty much free thinking or an open space. And an open space is, it can be quite scary. I mean, you feel quite exposed and fragile out there because you think, okay, so how am I going to be creative? What am I going to put together? How is this going to stand aesthetically or academically or anything like that? And especially when you're a student and you're, tradition, for example, I never suggest topics for their projects or their presentations or anything like that. I just allow them carte blanche to think in any way they want. And that's, that seems quite nice, but at the same time it's quite scary, because how do you populate that empty space with creativity? And I think that's our role, in a way, to nurture that creativity or the kind of creative instinct that people have, and try to make them feel comfortable within it. But once this happens, I don't know. I mean, it's like worlds blossom. It's quite extraordinary what happens. Like, especially with law students, there's this understanding that law students are a bit dry, a bit narrow. They're a bit kind of, they only think of one thing and they just want to get out of their degree and start making lots of money or something like that. But frankly, I've been astounded by the amounts of creativity and ideas and ways in which they can put themselves in, that they've come up with. It's just stunning. And through these processes, this kind of, let's say, lateral processes of putting together information or ideas, you can see that they really understand these ideas and make them their own. They embody these ideas in a way that normal, as it were, kind of, normal writing, normal thinking, even normal teaching would never achieve.
I love your passion in your voice there, Andreas, and I loved when you said, how do you populate an open space with creativity? I really think that is, to a certain extent, a teacher's challenge to create that environment. But you're obviously doing it because you're seeing it in your students when they're kind of putting these presentations and these pieces of writing together for you. But I just really want to dive into, why did you decide to introduce art, poetry and learning walks into your law teaching?
Is there another way?
I don't know, but I'm intrigued to find out.
So I'm a little unorthodox about this, but let me start you by saying that I believe that law is pretty much everywhere. I've come up in my research, I've been working on ideas such as I've come up with this idea called the lawscape, and the lawscape is this concept of putting together space, geographical space, as well as materiality in general, and the law. And the idea is that there is a tautology between law and space, the way that we come into a room, for example, the way we sit down, the way we speak to other people, the way we don't speak to other people, the way we switch on our computers, the way that we connect to the internet, all that stuff, are all characterized by law, by a certain normativity, and this normativity runs through everything we do. And the example is, look around you, we are at a comfortable environment wherever we are, but then we see that there is electricity, which means that, the particular place has actually paid its electricity bill. There's furniture that we use, which is probably approved by somebody. We know that they're not toxic, etc. So there's kind of a whole contractual regulative body of law behind everything that we do, however we, wherever we are, but also the way we stand, the way we sit, the way we behave towards others. This is perhaps slightly different kind of law, yes, but at the same time, law that can always become the other kind of law. So if you start sort of behaving inappropriately in a particular environment, then this might cause some sort of, problems in terms of, calling the police or whatever it is. What I'm trying to say is that the law is simply everywhere, and it just up to us to start touching around and feeling the law in different ways. And frankly, this is not just about the law. I think this applies pretty much to everything. I mean, an economist could easily make the same discourse about economy. A political theorist could do the same thing about politics, biology. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So we're surrounded by layers of transdisciplinary tautologies, and it's up to us to kind of put that the right goggles on and start looking around and seeing how things are different to what we initially perceive. So if this is the initial premise, we need ways to discover that which are equally unorthodox. And there's a lot of imagination involved in this exercise, of course, as well. But there's a lot of embodiment too. So I'm keen on using my students' bodies. I know that sounds odd.
Maybe at university it's okay.
With us. But using them as teaching tools. So I want them to start feeling their body in relation to other bodies around them. And I have some exercises that I'm playing with, and it's ways of exploring the space and ways of exploring how the body moves in relation to other bodies within that space. And that's already a construction of law, a construction of normativity that eschews us. So, for example, if you think about that famous traffic, the crossing in Japan, in Tokyo. I can't remember the name of it, but this very, very busy crossing which comes from 4 directions. People come and converge and need to cross the other side and all that stuff. A bit like Oxford Circus in London, but obviously Oxford Circus is not at all as busy as that. And you see how bodies simply slide past each other, and they manage to find their destination in exactly the way they want. They arrive where they want and all that stuff. They just negotiate the space with other bodies. So this is the kind of law that I'm really interested in. How does this normativity come through? And the best way to do it is to just play it out. Have your students walk around, you walk around with them in the space and define in small spaces or larger spaces in the city itself, etc. So this is one thing. Then you asked me also about art and poetry, and these are also different. I mean, I guess they're also creative, but they're different ways of doing. They're different modalities of learning. And poetry is not in itself, it's not something scary, but some people feel a bit scared about, or just disinterested in it. But there are ways of doing it. There are ways of just encouraging people to think poetically, write a bit of a poetic prose or something like that, combine it with social media, and try out different ways of combining again information. And then something comes out, quite a lot of themselves comes out in poetry. And art, again, is the visual, but it's also installations. We try to go to exhibitions. I try to ask them to do different things in various art institutions. Also trying to understand a little bit the limits of what art, the limits that art determines in the sense of how we're supposed to approach art. Why do we approach art always in a certain way? Why do we have to be reverential about art, etc.? So I also, I encourage my students to be a little anarchic, all that, to kind of, very mildly illegal stuff, like taking pictures when they're not supposed to be taking pictures and stuff like that. And then just think about challenging these things. So this is a lot about bodies and space as well. But at the same time, we use art in the sense of creating art. We're trying to make art. I ask them to draw things. It's a bit like, like going back to school, but the drawing does something to people that it connects them to something. Everyone says, well, I'm not good at drawing and all that stuff, but it connects them to something, it connects them to the things themselves, because you use your pen or pencil and paper, which is something that we increasingly don't do. And so there's so many ways in which the body and the mind participate equally in this kind of crazy learning process.
I really love how you're doing that, Andreas, and a few things kind of pulled into my mind as you were saying all of that. And it seems to me that you have found layers of creativity in your subject, but beyond the actual content. And I think sometimes what can happen is that we have this syllabus of content that we need to deliver to our students, and we can very much focus on what the content is. But it seems to me as though you have moved it beyond that. You've taken the content and you are applying it in a more creative way by trying to find connectivity of your subject matter to these other areas of specialism, and always asking that bigger question of why. So what I'm trying to kind of find out from you, you might not even realize that you've done it, but you've moved from a point of just focusing on the content and the syllabus, and you've extended it beyond that. And there's obviously a lot of creativity for you that has taken place in that process of moving forward. So what do you think it is that you did to make that jump forward in expanding it into these other areas?
No, you're absolutely right about that, and the kind of distinction you made between content and as it were, form. And I think, and you're absolutely right in the sense that quite a lot of us feel constrained to deliver this particular content, and we're a bit afraid of experimenting because we feel that we might lose out on the content itself. Perhaps we won't be able to deliver all the information we want to, or we have in mind, and I think that's a bit of a trap. So I guess I think the most important thing is not to be afraid to take risks. If there is one advice I give to early career lecturers, is just take risks, just expose yourself out there. And it's a jungle. It is really difficult. People who don't teach don't realize how intimidating it can be. Going out there, especially when you're just starting, but even when you're, you're quite experienced, there are days when you really do not feel like exposing yourself and being out there and laying yourself bare. And quite often you will cover yourself behind a bad PowerPoint or a few kind of, boring information and all that stuff. And I think the challenge is to get out there and also to enjoy it. And that might come later on when you see that people appreciate it. I think the guiding thought behind this taking risk idea is that students do not need to be loaded with information. They need to be shown ways in which information can be embodied, can be understood, can be practiced out while it's being delivered in a way. So it's not even a delivery. It's simply, again, you probably guessed that, but I'm not the kind of person who just stands and teaches. It's all about creating a space, creating a space amongst the bodies and the minds, and allow the thinking process to bloom in that space. And that's a common space. That's a space where people need to feel safe. So some basic things is right away when I enter a new class, I don't mind spending the whole first session just making people feel safe, not just with me but with each other. Trying to take ourselves quite lightly, give some silly information about ourselves, connect each other, connect everyone to each other, actually asking them to connect on Facebook, on, whatever, we create little groups, platforms, whatever it is, but also personally connect with each other, and make them feel that they can say whatever it is that they want to say, they can do whatever it is that they want to do without fear. And that's important, because it's also important for me, because I need to know that I'm not going to be afraid of being judged in that classroom environment, whatever I do, however we do things. So I think that is the first way of thinking about how to move away from the content. Now, the content itself has frankly no meaning unless it's done in a form that allows the students to think for themselves. And this is something I'm absolutely passionate about. I don't care about, in law there's endless lists of cases, pieces of legislation, stuff that has happening and all that stuff. I don't care about all that. As long as we give the story, we give ideas about why it is what is happening, and try and play it out. And then if they're interested, they will go away and look at all these things. You give them obviously material to follow on to and to carry on, further research, etc. if they want. But the main thing is, I'm happy if they understand, and if they, it's not just understanding it. If they own, as it were, a couple of ideas every session, and that for me is the guiding principle again behind this balance between content and form. The other thing is that you have to think carefully about what you're going to do. Every time, every session, and regardless of whether I repeat it over the years and all that stuff, it's not like that. I don't take notes of the form that I'm delivering stuff. Obviously, the content remains, roughly the same, but the form, it really depends on the group, or even on the day. I don't know, on the particular thing. Sometimes, ideas come to my mind while I teach, and I just think, well, okay, let's go with that. Let's see how this goes. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. It's all right. But I think it's important to have a good think about how you're going to do it, but at the same time, allow yourself to be more spontaneous while it is happening. So you see that some people have, for example, some personal stories they want to share, and all of a sudden you have this idea. Okay, let's play it. Let's do a little play. Like, why don't you get into small groups and let's enact this particular story about this person who, whatever. Like, I'm just giving an example that doesn't even apply to my modules, but say a difficult family situation where something has gone out of control, and then some sort of criminal activity has ensued or something like that. Let's play it out. Let's see how this works amongst us, and then this becomes quite memorable. This becomes like a story and an event in the actual class that students can take away.
So in your pursuit of creativity, what I'm kind of getting from you is that you are finding passion in your subject, and through the form, you are delivering the content. Is that right?
That's a good way of putting it. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. So it sounds like you've taken a lot of steps here, Andreas, and a lot of that is coming from your passion to deliver it in a certain way. And I love the creativity that you are creating within your environment. But is that all just coming from you, or have you done some research that you have used to kind of underpin the way in which you've developed this?
Unfortunately, there isn't a great deal of research, certainly not in terms of legal pedagogy and creativity. Again, because law is, as I told you, considered still to be quite a serious subject, let's say. One of those things that, you have to deliver in a certain way, and if you don't, then you're probably failing or something. But there's some creativity, some scholarship that deals with creativity and creative learning and teaching. It has to do often with space, movement, bodies, etc. And there are some collections, some edited volumes, etc., that have dealt with that. There's also a little bit on law, but there is enough research on law and art, but not so much in terms of using it for pedagogic reasons again. So it really is at this stage, I think it still is a trial and error process. And also it's a question of finding kindred spirits and just talking with them about how they do it and what they do. I'm lucky enough to be part of the Oxford University Press Law Teacher of the Year Award committee, and this is a very prestigious prize that is an annual prize across the UK for innovative and essentially teachers of the year, the law teacher of the year, and that's based on nominations by students. And well, I was also very lucky to win that award 3 years ago, and I'm saying lucky because my students gave so much of themselves and their time in order to nominate me for that. And
fabulous.
It is wonderful, actually. And I really, because it's a grueling process. I have to say, once you get nominated, and that's where I felt the responsibility of doing something really quite good for my students, because the nomination itself is quite long for them. They have to write, I don't know, like a 3,000 word thing on the nominee. And I didn't know about that until I was nominated, essentially. And but then the process is grueling, because it involves a lot of interviewing. They come and now we go, because I'm part of the committee now, and we observe the nominees, or the shortlisted nominees, teaching, and then we interview pretty much the universe in order to understand how they fit in their school, and what kind of methods they use, and why these deserve to be awarded. And I'm exposed to so much wonderful creativity, so many different ways of doing things, so many different thinking processes, and I consider myself especially lucky that we do that. So this is part of this dissemination of good practice. What we're going to do in June, and we start from June, and then we're going to do it annually, is going to be some sort of conference on pretty much innovative, new, radical pedagogies, and I think that will be quite a good source of new methodologies. But then again, this is a legal thing. I don't think that one should be limited by their discipline. There's so many different kinds of pedagogies. And so I was reading stuff from entirely different disciplines in order to understand how I could use it. Bizarrely, I was quite influenced by theatre studies and the way that, they use space and bodies and the kind of exercises that they do in order to make people feel more creative and do things. And or indeed dance therapy or movement therapy and other things. And I've worked with people, movement therapists specifically, and we've organized a few workshops on that. And that's a great source of inspiration to see what they do and how they do it. And then it's up to you to interpret it and to place it in the context of what you want to do. I'll give you a very brief example. I've worked with a movement therapist once, and she came up with some exercises that then I kind of decided to, as it were, orchestrate them into a courtroom. So we had the courtroom that, has its own space, its own hierarchy, its own levels, etc., and the various bodies that keep on circulating there. And that was the basis of all the exercises. All the exercises were somehow connected to the courtroom procedure. And it was a critique, of course, of the courtroom procedure and the kind of hierarchies that are there, and the kind of, decision making, which is always, a bit masculine, a bit kind of, of course, hierarchical. It comes from it pretty much comes from almost a theological source of authority and all that stuff. So through these exercises, we're trying to challenge all that, or first of all, visualize all that, and secondly, challenge all that.
I really love that, Andreas. I just, from the things that stick out in your memory about your education and the real moments where you can remember it clearly, it's those moments where you've participated in some kind of activity or interpretation of movement and dance, or something very significant has happened that has allowed you to recall that memory and the information around it. Whereas, like you said, if in law you teach law in a certain way that you go through all the cases. I mean, I did law at A-level. And do you think I can remember all those papers and papers and papers and papers? But had I been in your classroom enacting that scene, that probably would very much stick in my head.
Yes, exactly. In your head, in your body. This is the interesting thing. I mean, it's funny. I realize that I talk a lot about bodies, and education is not usually about bodies. It's about minds. But I beg to differ in that, because I don't think that there's a very big difference between the two. I think the two are, in a way, two parallel realities, but infinitely connected. And what our body, I mean, our bodies learn so much quicker and remember so much more. And in a way, if we could involve our bodies in the teaching and learning experience, everything becomes so much, as you say, so much more memorable, and also so much more real in a way.
You're very much echoing what Ray Picker said in her podcast interview. She did one with me on the mind-body connection, and she has been promoting it for years, the importance of not just focusing on what is going on up above the shoulders upwards. You've got to take the mind and the body and let it remember the learning. And she said it was really important. And you're pretty much saying the same kind of thing.
Yes. I think what is her background?
So she is in America, and she has been promoting for years. So she's an educationalist. She goes out, she teaches people how to use that mind-body connection. And she was saying that she's pretty much been up against it because she's been promoting it for so many years. But because there is a traditional way of teaching, trying to break down those barriers has been really tough. But she was saying there is so much research out there that says you have to do it together. It's important for it to happen together. And it just seems a bit mind-boggling to me that the research is out there that underpins it all, and everybody seems to ignore it.
Yeah, well, because it's difficult, because it's risky, because it's embarrassing, because, you know, it's one thing to hide behind our volumes of knowledge and our expertise and all that nonsense, and it's much harder to get rid of that desk that, you know, separates you from your students, come out there and be part of a kind of Alcoholic Anonymous circle, and you know, and be observed in exactly the same way as they're being observed by you. It's not easy. I have full sympathy for people who are afraid to do that. I mean, even the simplest thing of walking around, or not sitting all the time, or just, you know, just moving a little bit as an educator, for some people is a bit of a challenge. And I think it's because of that. I don't think it's laziness or anything like that. It's fear. And also it's habit and all that stuff. But I think in the core of it, it's because it's fundamentally embarrassing, and also it's fundamentally not according to the kind of preconceived ideas we have about what is to be an intellectual and what is to be a proper university or whatever education. I think schools, though, you know, school level do it quite well. I mean, it's much dirtier and hands-on, and they use all the right tools. So in a way, I think university teaching can learn quite a lot from kind of earlier stages.
Well, I think we just need to encourage everyone just to be that little 5% braver in going out there and taking the creativity risk and moving forward. So, Andreas, I really want to thank you for that. It's been really wonderful. So, Andreas, you've given us some fabulous ideas today, and you've touched on some excellent resources that can help others kind of pursue that creativity risk-taking challenge. But what would you recommend as a kind of go-to resource that you think can help people take those initial steps in changing the way in which they implement creativity within their teaching practice?
We organize some workshops. I direct a center called the Westminster Law and Theory Lab, and it's a research lab where we organize workshops on essentially what could work as alternative pedagogies as well. So we play a lot with theoretical stuff, but at the same time we get our hands dirty with specific applications of the kind of stuff we've been talking about here. So a month ago, we organized this event called Legal Poetics, and it's about writing poetry around the law, or with the law, or against the law, or whatever it is. And it wasn't about. It was a 2.5 hour workshop. So it wasn't about reading poetry or anything like that. It was about techniques of how to proceed with, you know, just writing something which was a bit silly, a bit, whatever it is, but it doesn't matter. The question is how to get over that initial barrier. So if people would be interested I would be happy for them to be added to the list, the mailing list, and we could invite them to events. We also have some really fascinating workshops taking place by the higher education. No, let me get this right. I can't remember the acronym is HEAT, as in warmth, heat, and that's part of the University of Westminster, and this is all about radical pedagogies, and so there's some excellent workshops taking place there as well. In terms of writing, in terms of reading and writing stuff, I think. I honestly cannot recommend one particular source. I think one has to be quite inventive in how to combine different kinds of research avenues and see. So, for example, if one wants to think about poetry or art in a particular discipline, then just Google it and then see how these particular things have been used in other disciplines, and whether one could adapt these to their own discipline. At the same time, I have my own art practice, which is sort of it's based on visual as well as text, and I go by the name of Pic Poet, the poet of pictures. It's not very good, but somebody actually suggested that name to me, and I thought, oh, that's quite nice. And this, so I have a website and all that stuff. So I play a lot with this other persona in a way. So it's quite a nice thing to. For people to have this kind of other sort of side of them, which doesn't have to be particularly good or anything like that. It just has to be socially available. So in the sense of social media available. So I'm on Instagram and, other platforms and all that. And then you invite people to join you, like your students, to join you in that thing. And then you exchange, ways of approaching the same stuff. So what I'm trying to say is that I don't think that it's appropriate to consider sources of authority for that. It's just ideas of practices of how to play with a particular group of students, the particular module, the particular discipline, and the particular ideas and interests that an educator might have.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been really, really wonderful jumping into how you're doing all of this, and I just think it's fabulous and a well-deserved award that you've won. So congratulations on that.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And it's been a wonderful interview. I mean, even your questions have been very inspiring.
Excellent. I'm so pleased to hear that. That's absolutely wonderful. Andreas, just before we do say goodbye, how can we connect with you?
You can find me on Facebook, the whole name there, unpronounceable, but it is there. Also on Instagram, I'm under PicPoet, PICPOET. Then there's another wonderful platform I would recommend people to play with that called ELLOLO. And there you find all sorts of creative ways of, either textual or visual or audio ways of sort of doing stuff. And there are lots of people who actually have it's a wonderful source of inspiration there. And of course via my university affiliation, so my email, which you can find very easily if you Google again, Andreas Westminster. I think that and the main one comes up.
So we'll hook up all of that in your show notes page at inspirationforteachers.com, so listeners can go to that page and find out everything to do with your recommended resources and a transcript of what we've discussed today. So Andreas, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on Inspiration for Teachers. For more resources, tips and advice, visit our website, inspirationforteachers.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, we would love to connect with you. Just click like on our Facebook page at facebook.com/inspirationforteachers.